Hi everybody, this is Ryan Schumacher. I am pursuing the STEM Masters in the Assessment Curriculum and Teaching area, and I teach 8th grade algebra and pre-algebra at Palmyra Area Middle School. So the purpose of my action research was to understand why students were not achieving as well as they could have. And what I wanted to do was to see which teaching strategy had more of a beneficial impact on the student academic scores. So I looked at small group and teacher-led instruction. And the reason I did it is my students learn in different ways, and I wanted to see how the different strategies impacted their learning because some of them are auditory learners, some of them are visual learners, and some of them are kinesthetic learners, and wanted to see how the different teaching strategies impacted their outcomes. So the research question I had was, what is the effect of small group instruction in pre-algebra on students' academic achievement? A little bit of background. My first article was by Odom, and they examined both teacher-led and small group instruction. There were 294 seventh grade students in the process, and they used a pre-test, post-test design. Results showed that the teacher-led instruction correlated to actually lower achievement, which led to more memorization and disengagement, while on the other hand, small group instruction showed an increase in achievement due to the more collaboration and engagement of students. My second article was by Kinsey in 2019, and they focused a little bit more on how in small group learning, active learning is an important component because students can problem solve, develop higher level thinking, and apply these ideas to real applications. So they're kind of taking ownership of their own learning. So those are just some of the characteristics of small group instruction and the benefits of it. The last one I have here is by Urion and Davidson in 1992, so this data is a little bit older, but before this research, there had not been enough done to show that small group instruction was actually effective for student achievement. So what they did was they compared what teacher-led instruction was the main practice and then compared it to small group instruction. So they found that when they used teacher-led instruction, it consisted of direct instruction and then using independent work, while on the other hand, small group instruction consisted of some direct instruction, but then working in small groups. And those scores actually showed that when they were working in small groups, the teacher-led instruction actually had higher scores. But after the implementation of small groups, the scores actually increased and actually surpassed the teacher-led instruction. So there was an impact of small group instruction in this case. So in my case, I designed it based on two of my pre-algebra courses. One group had 18 students and one had 17, so one was small group, one was teacher-led. And in the small group instruction, they were divided into groups of 2 or 3 so that they could work collaboratively on the lessons and the activities that went along with it. In the teacher-led instruction group, they worked independently, or we can pretty much did direct instruction for the most part. And then for data collection, I used two things. I used a pre-test, post-test design, which consisted of 12 questions worth 24 points. And then I did a self-assessment at the end of the unit that focused on student metacognition from their experiences while working in a small group or teacher-led instruction. So this is just a visual of what the test would have looked like. You can see the different standards that kind of come through it. Some of them are multiple choice. A lot of them deal with the operations of scientific notation, and then some of them are a little bit more in depth in this case. So from my findings, I break it down into all of my data here. So on the right-hand side here at the top, this is the pre-test, post-test scores for the small group, and then here's the pre-test, post-test scores for the independent group for each student. So both course obviously showed growth. All right, the blue indicates their pre-test comparing it to their post-test scores. The small group instruction increased by an average of about 32%, and then the teacher-led instruction increased by an average of 18%. While both are good, it does show that the small group instruction benefited the students more in this case. Then what I did was I broke down the different standards of each question, and they were broken down into 3 different ideas. One was converting into scientific notation. So the small group instruction average here in blue was approximately 93%, and the teacher-led instruction was approximately 92%, even 93%. And I looked at it this way because I said that the results could be interpreted that this standard could lead to more rote memorization just because the scores were so high, and it didn't really allow them to conceptualize anything. So maybe that's why there was that the closeness of their scores in this case. Then what we did, we broke it down into operations, so adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing in this case, and we saw a large difference here. Small group averaged about 96%, even 97, and then teacher-led instruction averaged about 84%, so that's about a 12, 13% difference. Um, and it does support the idea that small group is more impactful in this case because I'm thinking students were able to collaborate with more, they were able to kind of bounce ideas off each other in this case. And then we have the applications, which is kind of like the higher end here. Um, Actually, the small group scored about 82%. This is actually a misprint. That is not 9. That should be about 82.35. So actually, the teacher-led instruction outscored them just slightly here. So the results actually don't support the impact that small group is more beneficial. But I will say that my idea here is that I'm thinking the direct instruction group, the teacher-led group, was more impacted because they got to work with me more, listening to what I was processing rather than kind of always going through it with each other in this case. Then I broke it down into what the self-assessments kind of said. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was group choice. From the student responses, they indicated that working together was more beneficial. And I think that supports the post-test scores as they outscored, everyone did better, but I think the scores in the small group were higher in this case. So these are just some of the responses that I got from students. But I also asked them what were the weaknesses of working in small groups, and one of the biggest things they said was socializing, so off-task behaviors. I thought that back to the application problems, when the problems got harder, did they focus less and they didn't maybe care as much? So how could that have impacted their scores in that case? As a conclusion, I think some of the outcomes is that I found that small group instruction is more beneficial on student academic achievement, but I also need to provide more support for my students when it comes to certain standards so that they better understand how to tackle them on their own rather than just always, listening to what the teacher has to say. As the teacher, I think it's always important to receive that feedback from the students, and I think that's what the self-assessment did. It kind of showed me what worked well and what didn't work well for each class. And then being able to provide guidelines for how grouping works. I think roles for students, I talk about this in my paper a little bit. If students are assigned roles, I think you have a better understanding of how grouping works. It's not just a socialization process. It's more about, okay, what needs to be accomplished while we're working in groups. And then lastly, the school impact. I think if I can get my colleagues on the same wavelength to have some consistency among us, I think it will better support our students for them and their learning so that they can do it on their own rather than it's always what the teacher has told them to do. So I'm excited to kind of hear what you think about my action research, and I appreciate any feedback. Thanks.